Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibility Man. We're committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Our guest today is Elyse Simon. She is an integrative wellness educator and practitioner. She's the founder of Inner Spark Integrative Well-Being System. She supports clients in processing and cultivating a sense of well-being and physical health. Elyse Simon, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Stefan.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to our conversation, but first, a reminder to our viewers and our listeners, your support matters. Follow, like, and share this podcast wherever you find it. Elyse, look, I got a ton of questions for you. Let me start with this one. I'm kind of curious about this. What was your career before you got into integrative wellness?
Well, I have had an interesting trajectory. So I started out as a fashion designer. I grew up right outside of New York City. And it wasn't like I was the kind of person that was like, oh, all I want to do is be a fashion designer. But I ended up going up to University of Vermont and studying both business and textile design. And then I had decided that I wanted to try to pursue working in the fashion industry. I wanted to return back to New York City after spending 4 years in the mountains. And so, yeah, I was fortunate enough to start as a merchandiser in the more of the business end of things. And then I became a designer. I designed the handbag collections for some of the top brands.
That's impressive. Do you still do that kind of work?
Well, I still consider myself always a designer. Once a designer, always a designer. And, you know, I just think that there's design in everything. I mean, you design your life, the possibility, action man, right? You know, I think we're always designing or creating. It's really a creation thing.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So what made you look in the direction of, let's say, integrative health?
So I had spent, you know, I don't know if you saw the movie The Devil Wears Prada. But I actually did find the industry to be a bit like that. But, you know, I'm so grateful I got to travel literally around the world as a fashion designer. And so from that, it really sparked my interest in being able to design products. I mean, products are really, and systems, services, you know, it's just, it is my great passion to be able to take something and make it better. And so I did that for about 7 years. And then at the time, my husband's company was bought by Yahoo. And so we ended up moving out to California, and I wanted to make the priority my son. So I took some time, you know, to be a mother. And then out in the San Francisco area, I was able to start designing some products in Oakland, California. But what happened was I really started to have symptoms. I went through a divorce. And so I was having symptoms, physical symptoms of ulcerative colitis. I was having trouble with sleeping. And fortunately, at the time, my therapist, who originally had gone to Harvard, so was back from the East Coast, but living in California, had said that she had taken a class for 8 weeks at the hospital, and it was in mindfulness. And it was really my first time of experiencing from an inside perspective what it means to heal the mind, the body, and the heart. Because I was really heartbroken. I never thought that I was someone that was going to get married for life. And when, you know, this started to crumble and I knew I was going to be a single parent, and, you know, I had also had a lot of gut issues, you know, in the traveling, because traveling is very stressful. So I had learned at that time that stress is such a contributor. The experiences that we go through in life, particularly traumatic experiences, so affect our health. And so when I do something, I do it all the way. And so I took a class called MBSR, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I took it very seriously. It was recommended. John Kabat-Zinn is the founder of that program, which I am now also a teacher of. And I practiced, meditation for 45 minutes every morning and 45 minutes every evening, and, really followed the protocol. And it really did help. It really did help get me through what ended up being a 4-year child custody evaluation and a really ugly divorce. But, fortunately, I was able to live in the environment of California, which really supported, these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I actually did move back to the East Coast, because that's where I wanted to raise my son as a single parent, I became a teacher of mindfulness. And then from there, I went back for my master's in integrative health.
I see. Okay. So you've mentioned mindfulness and integrative health, and I want to look at both of those a little carefully. A lot of people talk about mindfulness today. How do you see mindfulness? What is that, and why is it important?
Well, so, if you break it down, well, I'll give you the actual definition according to John Kabat-Zinn, which is one of my masters, or not masters, what I got my master's in is mindfulness. He's one of my mentors. And he defines mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment. And the kicker is non-judgmentally. And I didn't just become a teacher of mindfulness. I then layered in some other trainings that I also use in many of my work with clients, which is a program called Mindful Self-Compassion. So once you kind of ground in an understanding and a practice of what is really foundationally focus and concentration, and what are you paying attention to? I then started to integrate these practices, and I realized that it has so much to do also with our energy, that we are energy bodies. And so I then expanded my qualifications and got trained in programs like nonviolent communication. Which I have the chart here. Like when I work with clients, I always use these charts, and oftentimes, I suggest that they use it on a daily basis, which primarily was founded by Marshall Rosenberg, who was a psychologist. He's no longer alive, but his work is very much alive. And Martin Luther King, was part of the beloved community, which also is based in the nonviolent communication. And basically, how this kind of ties into the integrative part and how it ties into mindfulness is, to me, there's an awareness triangle when we look at mindfulness. And I'm a mindfulness educator as well. And so at the top is thoughts, sensations, and emotions. So oftentimes, in this culture, people are looking at their thoughts, working with their thoughts. Certainly there's a focus on body, but there's not a whole heck of a lot of practice of emotions, working with emotions. And I'm sure, maybe through LinkedIn, which is where we met, you will see some professionals talking about emotional intelligence or emotional sobriety, things like this. And what I have, unpacked in many of the practices that I apply is that emotion is actually energy in motion.
Well, you've given us a lot already. Let me jump in right here and ask this.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of techniques and practices, but what's the outcome of this? Let me put the question this way. From where you sit, is it possible for a person to achieve or experience growth from conditions that may bother them?
That's such a great question. And what I primarily focus on, what I've come to know as post-traumatic growth. Now, some people are put off by the word trauma. And I do want to unpack that in a sense, because there's big T and there's little t. And so, kind of throughout our lives, well, as the Buddha said, the first noble truth is there is suffering, right? So throughout our lives, there's pain, there's pleasure, and there's neutral. So at the very core practice of mindfulness, we're noticing when there's pain, pleasure, and neutral. Oftentimes, we're running from the pain. We would like to not have the pain. We're going towards the pleasure. And much of the time, we're not even aware of the neutral, right? So to answer your question, I really feel that a big piece of mindfulness is about self-awareness. And so when it comes to growth, it's a decision, and then it's a commitment, right? So I'm not going to say, it doesn't take work to become mindful, or in particular, self-aware, right? And so if someone does commit to becoming more aware of the situations, maybe there's limiting thoughts. Maybe a person thinks they're in their body, but they're not actually all that aware of subtle things that are going on in their body. Then what one has to know you become aware in order to maybe grow past it.
Yeah. It sounds like you're suggesting that this is you can show people what to do and be with them, but it's an inside job that it requires inner work of some sort.
Yes, but it does, in my experience, it does take learning. That's why I'm an educator, because one takes an understanding, and it's a direct experience. It's not just, listening on YouTube or reading a book, right? It's really something that I've come to know as something that's called attunement. So in order to start to get comfortable with sitting with yourself, right? Because, we're in a fast-paced world, as you know, and there aren't that many people that are able to go live in a cave or on a mountain, right? The way that maybe, the original mindfulness practices, started. So it really does take a commitment for someone to say, you know what, it's really important to my growth as a human being to make the commitment to know thyself.
So in that regard, then, okay, so a person has to be committed to do something, but does every person have a sense of what they want to achieve in that respect?
Well, that's why I've called my brand Inner Spark, because I believe that everyone does have a spark. But, there's maybe some people feel that they are living their life purpose, but overall, it does seem like until someone is more in touch with what I have come to know as either the soul or the spirit, they may not be in touch with that spark. Yeah.
Okay. So you feel that everyone has some type of inner truth, some type of inner knowing that they can have to get in touch with?
They don't have to. Nobody
Nobody.
has to. Yeah. But I do think, and I have found that, it's getting younger and younger, but usually in what I call like the sort of second and third chapters of people's lives that they've lived, right? And they come into experiences where they start to question, like, am I, really here to do this? What am I here to do? And to your original question about growth, this is where, some people have a growth mindset. Not everybody has a growth mindset, but the people that do, that are wanting to evolve or awaken or whatever, or become enlightened, like whatever it is, that you're choosing to do. Okay. Even just further your career,
Right. So, so in your practice and just from living, what kinds of things do people bring to you? What kinds of things from, modern people are faced with on a regular basis? What types of challenges?
Yeah, well, there's, stemming from the triangle, right? The thoughts, sensations, emotions, there's a lot of doorways in. And usually, in my experience, pain is your teacher. So, maybe you're having, and it's usually in 5 different areas I have found. When I do an intake with someone, I will assess 5 different areas. One is the mental, like, how is your thinking? Do you feel like you're obsessively thinking? There are different areas in which, the mental capacities could be affected. The other is physical, right? People have physical challenges all the time. So we assess that. And I have found that, yes, there's Western medicine and more traditional ways of handling it, but oftentimes there are situations in which that isn't enough. Right. And so, maybe some of these other ingredients are contributing to what is not healing the physical. And some people really just take a physical lens. I happen to feel that all these other components, the mental, the emotional in particular, can be contributing to it. Maybe even the spiritual, maybe you've been through like really difficult trauma, veterans, first responders, maybe you've had like a real serious trauma. And, you may feel a spiritual connection, but you may have lost your soul connection, because it was so awful and it was so painful that you think, how could there be a God or whatever it is, or universe is on my side, kind of thing.
If you were to list a couple, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The 5th one is just relational or sexual.
Okay. But I want to get closer to what people are saying to you. And, so if they're saying, look, I got a problem and this problem causes me to feel blank, what are they reporting? Are there some specific conditions that they're reporting that they're experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's so many, but overarching, particularly with the warrior, like, because I often will work with a warrior, and a warrior could be anything from a single parent to a first responder to an academic, that's really challenged themselves in the educational realm and feels burnt out, or a physician that is just giving too much. I would say overarching, it would be a needs not met. So and that has a lot to do with the nonviolent communication, where people are over giving, or in situations where they're, just not meeting their own needs or getting their own needs met.
I see. So a person may report that they're experiencing burnout and they don't know why, and you help them get in touch with that and find ways around that. Is that what you suggest?
Yeah, that's one way. Or, for example, someone could be having brain fog, right? But then we will tie it to, maybe there's gut issues, see, this is where everything is interconnected. Or they're having relational issues, right? They are having trouble with their marriage and they don't reach out and know what to do to have help. And that's affecting their physical health, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's all interconnected. And what makes this a whole practice or integrative practice is, generally when someone goes to get traditional medicine, they are on average given about 7 minutes to, talk about what the issue is. And then they're oftentimes treated, with a pill or some other kind of intervention that's much more physical, where, when you're dealing with the whole system, it really, really helps to be something what I call compassionately communicated with.
So is the thinking mind, and I know this shows up in your work, our friend, or is it an obstacle as we're trying to experience or move ourselves forward in our lives?
I believe it's both, right? And it depends. Like, you've heard the saying, like, don't go into the bad neighborhood of the mind. So sometimes we have a fierce inner critic, especially those of us that are overachievers. And so many times, people that are pushing themselves really, really hard, will be really competing with themselves, not even necessarily competing with others. But, they want more and more and more, and then it starts to feel like nothing's ever enough. So sometimes that's where our thoughts can be contributing to what is going on, where, we're maybe not getting enough sleep, right? Or we're not eating the right things because, I'm so busy. Like, I'm just trying to, like, I got to do this, I got to do that, right? So, it's important to be able to pause.
So not understanding the mind, is that a blockage when it comes to human growth and evolution? Or can it be a blockage? Not understanding the mind.
No, not listening to the mind.
Not listening. Okay.
Not necessarily understanding, because that in itself can contribute to this over obsessive thinking, right? Like, I just want to understand, especially for those of us that are academics. It's like, I just want to understand. I just want to understand, right? And sometimes, like Einstein said, you're not going to necessarily figure out the problem from within the problem, right? So sometimes you're like in your thinking and you're trying to understand, right? So a big contributor is, can you drop from the thinking mind into the feeling body?
How does meditation help us achieve what you just said? Go from thinking to feeling body.
Yeah. So I just want to slow down.
Okay.
So that's the first thing, right? So we as human beings are on automatic pilot most of the time, right? So one thing about meditation is it's inviting us to slow down, and particularly around the trauma piece of it, right? So if you have been through little t, big T, the mind tends to want to ruminate about the things in the past, right? So one thing is to, really be able to slow down. And you hear this from like all of the teachers, right? All of the wonderful mentors, the power of now, right? Yeah. This present moment, right?
Yeah.
Which sounds delightful, but it actually takes intention, right? It's like, well, okay, so first I want to intend to be in this present moment. So what does that mean? Well, let's investigate. Let's check in with the mind. Am I thinking about the past? Am I planning for the future? Like, you could be sitting and meditating and you're thinking about what I'm going to cook for dinner, right? So you're meditating on that, right?
Yeah.
So it really, really asks you to come into the body, right? And so there are all these kinds of skills and tools that invite you to do that. Now, here's the other thing about trauma, right? these bodies are our vehicles, right? And so many times we have not always been very good to the body, or someone else has not been very good to the body, right? There's lots of traumas that take place. So you can get very triggered when you go into meditation. So you, again, what are you meditating on? You may be meditating on the trauma that happened in the past, and you're triggered, and you're far from in a meditative state, right?
Yeah. In respect to that, to trauma, you used the phrase big T and little t. This is the first time I've heard that. When you say big T, what are you referring to? And when you say little t, what are you referring to?
Yeah. So, little t to me are these little things that happen continually throughout our lives. And generally, you'll hear developmental psychologists talk about from the womb to 7 years old, right? Those are very developmental times in our minds, in our bodies, right? That's when we develop. And so little t to me often takes place in childhood. Like there are things, these little like injuries that happen to us. Maybe someone, criticized us, or, maybe we felt abandoned. There's all kinds of things that take place, at that time that can contribute to the little t. And then as we mature, or not, but as we mature, they're constantly coming up again, right? We're getting triggered in relationship, or, throughout the time so that is what I would consider to be the little t, right?
Okay.
Those little things that are
in connection with that, though, because it's something that's got me wondering, what if there's a child that's like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the child's parents are continually telling him, be quiet, shut your mouth, in a very angry kind of way. And as the child matures, the child feels that he has lost his voice. Is that a part of little t?
Most definitely. Most definitely. And that, really, literally, I will find that people will have throat or thyroid issues. Like it then metaphysically, can often take place, go into the body, because we are made up of cells. And the ancestors, this is another big component to the little t as well.
Okay.
The cells, our DNA are made up of our ancestors, at least 7 generations back. So when we come into these bodies, and not everyone believes this, and I'm not saying everybody needs to believe this, I believe that our ancestors, I feel that we incarnated for the ancestors. We said, ooh, I'll come down. And that, that we have, we are doing the work for the ancestors, And so sometimes, maybe a great grandfather was silenced in that way, right? And there you are, maybe it wasn't even directly in this lifetime that you're being silenced, but you find yourself like having trouble, with throat chakra, like expressing, or, you feel shy, or, there's so many different ways that can present.
That's interesting. You're saying that some of this stuff may travel in your genes to a different time period, and the person living now may be experiencing it. Wow.
That is my experience. And that's why some of what I do with Inner Spark Studios is ancestral healing.
I see. Now, big T. What is big T about?
Yeah, well, I think we're experiencing a lot of it right at the moment, war, like when I work with first responders, many of them, the leader, the chiefs, running into a burning building and seeing horrific things, big T, or rape, crime, violence, these all contribute to big T. The good news is,
tell us the good news.
There is good news. I do believe it can be released. But it does take the commitment and the willingness. This is the thing, it's an openness. And sometimes when a very big T is losing a child, for example, that is a big T. And when that's happened, from my experience, it can become complicated grief.
Mm.
And again, maybe that happened 3, 4, 5 generations back, right? That a child was, and even like a miscarriage,
Yes.
So these are all what I call laying in the subtle body.
Mm. Okay. Now, how does compassionate, you've mentioned it a few times, and I want to hook it in now. How does compassionate communication figure in all of this that we're talking about? Not just one thing, but how does it figure in?
Yeah, well, so, we talk so much about love and kindness and forgiveness, all these beautiful words, peace, inner peace. And in my experience, when someone commands, when someone says to you, you calm down, that not all that successful often, because the defense system of the body will come up and probably resist.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. But I'm sorry, you want to finish that thought for me?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say around compassion, but however, if a person is fully met and heard and listened to and feels held, then there is the possibility, there might be the permission for that body to relax and potentially, allow themselves to forgive, to love, to feel a sense of kindness. So to me, that's at the very base of compassion.
Okay. In our culture, this is just from what I observe, it's like we are trained to say it's important to speak truth to power. So that is, if someone is, acting in a certain way, it's not like you go in there with some nicety type of language. You go in to fight the situation. How can compassionate communication help us with this? If you follow me, if not, let's
I'm loving this question.
Okay.
Not only am I following you, but so I have been so blessed to be able to work at times with law enforcement. So if you think they go in and nice talk, yeah, that's not always happening. So there's such a thing as fierce compassion as well, right? And where you see this, where I have seen it is in the kind of parent, the mother, like that, the mother that's able to lift the car, if God forbid her child is run over, right? Right. So this is what I see power to compassion, right? So it's also about standing up for yourself, right? So it's not just this empty, and this is what I think has in particular in the science, maybe until about 20 to 25 years ago, it wasn't really studied. And some of my mentors like Christopher Germer, Kristen Neff, and Paul Gilbert, I haven't worked with him directly, but they have done studies on, in particular, self-compassion, but compassion as well. And what has been misinterpreted is that compassion is weak. And the Dalai Lama, he's all about compassion, right? And so it's been misinterpreted that actually compassion is something that's weak. But apparently in the clinical studies, the opposite is the case. Yeah. So we are having to unlearn. And this is part of it. And this is not to say that compassion looks the same way in every circumstance, right? Every circumstance is the way that it is. And there is a yin and a yang piece to compassion. Kristen Neff actually talks about this. I would recommend that you go and listen to some things that Kristen Neff teaches on this, as does Chris Germer. And so, there is the yin and the yang, right? So sometimes you create this environment of compassion, right? But sometimes it's action, it's compassionate action, right? Which would be more of the yang.
Okay. So is compassionate communication the same as nonviolent communication? The book that you mentioned, Arthur, a little while ago. Is it the same thing or is it slightly different?
I think nonviolent communication is a tool for helping to get to compassionate communication. So compassionate communication, in my understanding of it, is that whether what is going on is whether the needs are getting met or the needs are not getting met, can we be in communication with ourselves or with others and bring compassion?
Yeah. Okay. Now, mindfulness shows up in your work as one of your practices that you share with clients, but I've also noticed that directed dialogue also shows up in your work. What is that? What do you do with that?
So you're calling it directed dialogue. I'm actually trained, and these are some of my other mentors, which Gregory Kramer and Dr. Janet Surrey. She is my direct mentor and oversaw my thesis. And they teach a program, and he was the founder of it, Gregory Kramer, called Insight Dialogue. And there are, I could do a lot of teaching on it, but basically there are six guidelines to Insight Dialogue. The first three are pause, relax, open. And I'm just covering it. This is just to say I've been practicing it for 12 years. So it takes time. Pause, relax, open. So that's where we use mindfulness and compassion in dialogue to gather insights. And then the next three are trust. It used to be trust. Well, now it's trust attunement. So we're trusting what's happening in the field of possibilities once we're paused, relaxed, opened. And then the next two are speak the truth and listen deeply. Now, speak the truth is not like you're lying, right? Although it could be, but it's like speak your truth. Yeah, and listen deep. And the biggest one is listen deeply.
Okay. Something else showed up as I was scanning what you do, and I hope I get this right, but it seemed to me that you were suggesting that a person can achieve mastery of the soul, or at least something in connection with their soul. Is that about right? And how does that happen?
I don't know about mastery, but I do think that, in what I do with Inner Spark Studios is to help a person to find harmony between their personality and their soul.
Okay.
Right. So I believe we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so I'm not sure, there are some people, but I, in my experience, wasn't all that aware of the soul. And so I feel that I'm a bit of a soul educator, but there's also the human body and the personality, right? And that's what makes us all unique. So how can we find greater harmony between our personalities and our soul?
Okay. Yeah. So in that regard, healing also shows up in your work, and you've used the word warrior. In fact, you used it earlier in this interview, warrior healing. Tell us about that. Take us into that.
Yeah. So again, the Buddha, with his teachings, he was to me the ultimate, teacher, educator, psychologist. And, he said it, he kind of deduced it this way to two wings of the bird, wisdom and compassion, wisdom and compassion. And so we can be compassionate and not have such great wisdom, right? Or we could have great wisdom and not be all that compassionate, And so to me, that is kind of the ultimate healing of the soul, is how can we, again, find a greater harmony between our wisdom. And, just because we're sharing our wisdom doesn't necessarily mean that someone else will find that to be their wisdom, right? And the same is true around compassion, right? Like I can feel like, oh, I wish that person was more compassionate, and they could feel like I'm being really compassionate, Right. So this is where my ultimate overarching theme is around relational practices.
Do you also share that human beings have inner guides or have guides?
I love your question. I do. I do. I don't expect that everybody does. Oh, and I didn't answer the thing about warrior. Sorry.
Yeah,
but that reminded me because, and you would think law enforcement and warriors and guides, but they're the key guide for, say, for example, law enforcement is Archangel Michael, the protector.
Right. Okay.
And so that is another big piece of it, because really overarching, we as human beings want to be safe, feel safe, right? Like that's a really important thing to us. And there are circumstances in which we do go into fear, right? And so when you hear that saying, love over fear, right? Sometimes situations are out of our control, right? Especially with traumatic situations, right? They feel really out of our control. And so that's when I feel like it can be incredibly helpful to tap into our guides. And they can be ancestors. They can be actually ancestors, in my opinion, working from the other side. They can be angels, they can be a tree, like this is the thing that makes it universal for me. It's like you don't tell someone else who their guides are,
Well, how can a person find out? Someone may say, Elyse, I want to know who my guide is. How can I find out?
Well, one, it's a willingness. And then, in my opinion, it's opening to the heart. So to me, that's where the heart work comes in, right? So oftentimes if someone is blocked, like they've been through terribly heartbreaking situation, right? They might lose their faith in their guides, right? So that's where the healing, and that's in particular why I choose to work with the warrior, right? Because I personally think everybody has a guide, but I certainly can be very understanding of why a warrior, like a veteran, would possibly, feel like they want to be in touch with their guides, but may not be actually feeling it in their bodies.
Okay. So does your company, Inner Spark, offer programs that are available to the public? And if so, what sort of programs do you offer?
Well, at the moment, I'm developing the course to primarily, work with and integrate a lot of these different systems, but I also want to mention recovery, like the 12 steps and ACA and programs like that. I think that those are very instrumental in forming a spiritual belief as well. So yeah, I'm forming a course, but I'm also working directly with clients that are looking to connect with their guides and also to find their inner spark, as far as their soul purpose.
Okay. So as we conclude, Elyse, is there anything else that you want to share with us that I have not asked you already?
I love to connect directly with people. So I'm going to actually turn it around and ask you, because you found me on LinkedIn and you were really interested in interviewing me. So I'm really curious. I'm really, really curious about what it is that I'm doing that had spiked your curiosity.
Integrative wellness caught my attention, and I'm sure that will appeal to a lot of people watching or listening to this podcast. So look, I'm happy that you're doing what you do. It certainly has been great having you on the show today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, and have a wonderful weekend.
Okay. You've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. Our guest today has been Elyse Simon. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton. Until next time, good day. You are not alone, just keep on.